Talk more about our democratic process, or lack thereof. We're joined by Lee Fang, a journalist with The Intercept, and Paul Henderson, a lawyer here in San Francisco's mayoral office, who's running for judge in this fine city of ours. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hey.
It's election day for you.
It is election day.
Are you nervous?
Oh, no. Not at all.
Okay. Oh.
Have you been out shaking a lot of hands?
I just left the streets. I've still got my sign that I was handing out with my material. It's right behind me.
Well, we appreciate you being here because we know polls are still open here for another 2 hours and a half or so. So thank you.
Exactly. Happy to take a break for a minute.
All right.
So, Paul, what is the most important thing to you as a judge looking at who becomes our next president?
Wow. There's so many things from top to bottom, but we can start with the Supreme Court because I think both of the candidates have talked so much about. I was really excited in their last debate where they started off talking about how they both had a priority to address who is going to sit on the Supreme Court, and that is going to be super important. By the way, it won't be me. I don't think either one of them is going to nominate me for that position, but it's really going to define.
That attitude, Paul.
Well, maybe. Let's wait and see what they're going to do.
What's up with the fact that there is someone who's been nominated by the president and yet nothing's happened?
I think that is a tragedy. I think that it really defines what the problem has been between the Democrats and the Republicans in ways that we haven't seen in the past. We've never seen a process that is this broken down so that we don't even have candidates being evaluated and considered regardless of what their experience has been for these important decisions. And because of that, we are at an impasse with our Supreme Court.
And it's not just the Supreme Court, right? It's other courts as well and other nominations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
All the way along the route. And the problem is with the Supreme Court is when there are challenges at the county level, at the state level, they don't get resolved. And what ends up happening is when there's a stalemate because there's a split of authority at the Supreme Court, you fall back on whatever the ruling was at the appeal court. And that's oftentimes the issue, the very issue that's being appealed because people feel like, well, that's just not right. And so we are stuck having all of these very important issues not being resolved again and again and again until we get a candidate in there that gets approved and gets appointed ultimately to sit and serve on the Supreme Court. I think it's really important. I'm glad both of the candidates are talking about it because to me that reflects that they understand how important the judiciary is, but I don't know how it's going to get resolved. But we won't be able to answer that question until we know what the leadership is going to look like in the White House to see what the next step is going to be.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about voter suppression. We've seen 15 states this year have changed their voting laws, stricter ID laws, cutting back early voting, having registration changes to registration, right? So how, this is also the first presidential election where the Voting Rights Act has been a sort of shell of what it used to be, right? Protecting specifically minority voters in southern states from any kind of voter suppression. How have you seen that play out this year? And maybe Hadley wants to jump in too, or,
Sure. Well, it got gutted with the ruling in 2013, during the summer of 2013, when they removed the preclearance for the 9 most restrictive states historically. And so since then, almost immediately, we started seeing laws changing both in counties and in laws, specifically in areas like in North Carolina, where they started making their voter IDs more stringent. And that has a real impact on not just disenfranchised communities, but typically communities of color where they have to start jumping through all of these hoops in order to register or get registered in order to even get to the polls. And so those conflicts are not being resolved because they have to go up through and to the Supreme Court. Again, I hate to keep bringing back the importance of the judiciary, but that's exactly why this is such a big problem that has to be addressed. And I think that these are solutions that have to come from the federal government because if left to their own devices, individual states are making decisions that are inconsistent across the board and across the nation that have a disparate impact on these communities. But, that's
North Carolina being an example recently where they tried to purge a bunch of people from the voting rolls. I think a federal judge says they were surgically targeting black folks, which we know vote Democrat. But let's turn to Lee for a second now. Campaign finance reform is something that we hear so much about this election. break it down for us a little bit and talk to us about why it's so necessary that we see it soon.
Well, it's kind of a weird issue to talk about because, just throwing out numbers can be confusing, I guess. There's been a lot of money spent in this election. We're seeing a decline of the role of small donors. Obama had this small donor revolution where he had a vast amount of his funding from folks giving less than $200, small amounts of money. We're seeing that trickle away. Hillary Clinton is relying on about 50% less small donors than Obama. We're seeing the role of big money really play a big impact down the ballot. Corporations have spent over $350 million influencing ballot measures alone. In many of these local races, these Senate races and House races, you're seeing it just being completely swamped by big money, and in a way that is very confusing for voters because majority of these independent expenditures go to negative advertisements that confuse folks, that promote kind of hate and distortion.
But what about the $27 average Bernie supporter? Come on now. Isn't that just like the ray of light? Can we just focus on that and forget all the other stuff?
And that's the kind of other interesting dynamic because, McCain had a very robust fundraising apparatus. Romney really pioneered a lot of super PAC strategies. But Donald Trump has not used big money to the same degree. He's used a lot of small donors, but he's had help from the media. And we've seen the role of the corporate media, the mainstream media, promote certain candidates while diminishing others, particularly people like Bernie Sanders. For example, there's a study done showing that the major networks, ABC, NBC, provided, I think, about 350 minutes of coverage to Donald Trump in 2015. ABC provided less than a minute of coverage for their evening networks to Bernie Sanders. So even with the $27 donations to Bernie, with the kind of mainstream media collusion with establishment political forces to block him out of the process, it's been very difficult, even with this small donor revolution.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of times, I know in local elections, kind of advertising is sort of playing the role of that local media should be playing. So we're just seeing attack ads, and it's almost like, rather than the actual reporters and journalism about that issue, most people just see pamphlets or they see advertisements.
Totally, and we're in a perfect storm of bad media. Because of the internet revolution. Yeah, of course, yeah, the best. But we've had thousands of layoffs of reporters around the country. There aren't people covering local issues. They aren't explaining the public policy issues that are facing this country. Just last week, the folks who broke the story of Bridgegate, Governor Chris Christie closing down the Fort Lee Bridge to punish a Democratic mayor who wouldn't endorse him in his reelection, those two reporters were laid off last week. So for normal voters who are trying to understand where the candidates stand on different positions, and they go online or they go and they watch the television, unfortunately they're mostly seeing attack ads or kind of news bites that are crafted by the campaigns. So that's really unfortunate, and this is all happening at the same time when big money is just really flowing into the election to a degree that we haven't seen in the past.
How's this? We talk like this the whole time? That'd be so much easier.
Do you guys even have the audio on? Go ahead.
Oh, by the way, please send in your comments and questions for Lee Fang and Paul Henderson, please. They're real smart, and this is awesome, so take advantage of them while they're here.
Can I just talk about the media stuff that he was just talking about? Because I think just to tie it together on why that media stuff is so influential, like the money stuff is influential, but the money typically is used to influence the media. And so when you have a candidate like Donald Trump that has so much of that media attention, that is what is influencing voters.
But
That's
I don't
what's
think he
making...
necessarily got all that attention because CNN really wanted to see him rise in the... I think they were like, oh, this is great. He just offended someone. What a great story. Oh, he just tweeted this. And I don't know if they definitely... It was so good for their ratings. They definitely contributed to his ascent.
I think the Hollywood Reporter reported that CNN made a $200 million surplus, more than they thought they would make because of political coverage this year.
And here we are today.
That's a lot of money, you know?
This is what happened. I mean, they completely facilitated the rise of Donald Trump. He's a mastermind in that he didn't really have to spend the billions that he otherwise would have on advertising.
Okay, so let me put it to you this way, because I've heard it both ways. Like, I actually heard an interview with Rachel Maddow, and she was saying, she was like, well, he knows how to play the media.
Oh, yeah.
He does.
So what then
like
is the
responsibility? Has promoted
responsibility?
him. I'm like, I mean, is she talking about the role of NBC in promoting Donald Trump?
What is that role? I mean,
That's
'Cause they
basically
covered
an
him a lot.
in-kind
They
contribution to
covered
the
him.
campaign
Right.
because they're not talking about the issues. They're cutting straight to his rallies. They're not really at least, especially in the beginning, in 2015 and during the Republican primaries, they weren't carefully going through his business record, his record at Trump University. They were basically taking whatever insult or thing he said on Twitter that day and making a news segment out of it because it's cheap, it's easy, and it gets
It's like reality television.
yeah,
And that goes beyond
it's
the
a tabloid.
Nobody really wants to watch
They
it.
personalized who he was. It literally was entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So you would tune in to hear what he had to say about these other candidates, and all of that vitriol, all of those insults, all of his bombastic approaches to both the process, the political process, and the people that were running against him, that was the entertainment. And that got covered throughout all of the media.
And it wasn't just that. It was also various talk shows letting him call in whenever he damn well felt like it.
If he tweeted about anything, they would cover it.
Yeah.
But what that did was put his presence in the mind of voters.
Totally.
I mean, that is invaluable as a politician, that you are having your name repeated, that the things that you say, good or bad, get repeated and proliferated throughout various sources. How many people started following Donald Trump when the media started telling them about some of the tweets that were going out and not following? And this, to me, is the damaging part, that we weren't following as a nation the policy approaches, right? The intellectual approach to running for office that I think we should have been focusing on, because they typically matter, but maybe those things weren't as entertaining to a broader audience. And when you have a candidate like Donald Trump that's just going to get out there and yell and scream and say whatever he wants to say.
Cats, like, we should have cat videos and local, present each proposition, local proposition. That'd be a lot easier to follow. That's the BuzzFeed. We love BuzzFeed. They're homies. This is AJ Plus's live election coverage. We're wrapping up 18 months of, not wall to wall.
I have a few new gray hairs,
Yeah,
just
for
to
sure.
say.
I used to. I took care of that. Yeah,
I wanted to ask Lee, you've written a lot about the Koch brothers and the rise of the Tea Party and their role in that. And now that we have a candidate who is kind of, I mean, he's kind of the spore that grew off of, I think, the moldy gym shorts of, Ted Cruz's filibuster of Obamacare. He is the...
That's a good metaphor.
Thank you. He is the epitome of this sort of Tea Party strategy of obstructionism to the Obama administration. Where have we seen the Koch brothers now, and what happens to the Republican Party and big money, sort of small government interests going forward, given the rise of someone like Trump?
That's a lot, but it's a great question, and I think the big question going after Election Day, that is the question. What's the direction of this type of strategy for politics? This right-wing populism that did not just emerge this year; it became much more visible in certain ways because Donald Trump took typical Republican messages that kind of had an implicit call for violence or ethnopolitics, and he took it just a little bit more explicit. But this style of politics that has been cultivated not just by the Koch brothers, but by powerful business interests in this country, it's not going away because it makes a lot of money, right? In 2009, when President Obama won, Democrats won supermajorities in both houses, and for the first time in the last 100 years, these supermajorities weren't predicated on Dixiecrats. This was a true progressive majority. The reason they couldn't pass big progressive reforms is that the Koch brothers and other business interests, fearing that they would be taxed more, they would be regulated more, they would face more government rules, they went out into the country and spread, Obama's a birther rumors. They went out and organized these rallies that said, climate change is an attempt to steal your fridge. They want to regulate every appliance.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh, it's a good one.
Climate change.
It's on the record.
Yeah.
Activists want to steal our fridge.
Yeah. Well,
that's horrible.
Yeah.
To give you an example, I went to some of these rallies where the Koch brothers had organized them. They called one the EPA Regulation Reality Tour, and they wanted to constrain the EPA's ability to regulate carbon dioxide from power plants. So, that's a kind of esoteric issue, and explaining kind of the contours of climate change might have gotten lost on people. But a much easier way to engage people is to say, big government's coming, and they want to regulate all of your electricity and take away all your appliances that use a lot of electricity, like your fridge. And so they seeded the country with conspiracy theories, with hate, and they got people on the phone to call their members and demand, action against EPA action. And they got people to the polls, and you saw within 2 years of Obama's kind of revolutionary election in 2008, Republicans then having their own counter-revolution with one of the biggest midterm gains in all of Republican history, and blocking pretty much the Obama agenda for the last 6 years.
Yeah. Can I tell you what worries me is that, just turning back to this election, Donald Trump for the past few weeks has planted this seed that there's massive voter fraud, that it is a rigged election, right? And even if Hillary Clinton clearly wins tonight, that theory is not going to go away, and his supporters are going to repeat it over and over and over, the same way that he said Barack Obama was not born in the United States and he is a Muslim, and then you just see it spread, and people still believe that to this day. I'm just throwing that out there if you guys want to comment on it.
I think that is super important because let me just say, because this bounces off of some of the things that Lee was just saying, because Donald Trump has been at the forefront of many of those arguments about the birther stuff. About global warming, about immigration. And I started noticing becoming more clear and very focused in that way within the Republican Party as early as 2010 and 2011, which at the time I thought this is going to be a problem for the party. If they don't say something now to start distancing themselves from him, it's going to be an adoptive admission and it's going to be bad for the party, and here we are. But to your point, in terms of what he's saying now, I think all of those things are a problem, not just for him, but for the rest of the nation as well. Right now, we're still going to have to deal with those and try and find some solutions, and I don't know how he's going to get out of that. That's a problem.
Hadley, we have some results, I hear.
Yeah, we do. A bunch of states are being called, and we've had, since we last talked, South Carolina and Alabama have gone to Trump.
South Carolina, Alabama, okay.
Oklahoma, I'm not sure if we mentioned that before.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to clear up for all of our listeners that these are all very early states. Trump is ahead 60 to 44 in that electoral count, but these are all the East Coast states, with the polls closing first. And so far we've had no surprises. Every state that's come in is voting the same as they did in 2012 so far. And no swing states have really been called.
So New Hampshire, we don't know anything about New Hampshire yet?
New Hampshire is still being called. It is Hillary's up there though with 9% only reporting. Hillary's up there 53 to 42.
9%. So CNN's about to call this then. Cool.
And then just we do have a lot more coming in from Florida. It's now almost 70%
in. All the 70% of the votes are
70% in.
Okay.
Now Trump 49, Clinton 48.
Wow.
So
okay.
Keeping our eye on that.
Thank you, Hadley.
Can we talk about the voter fraud stuff?
Yes.
Okay, so with the voter fraud, let's just put this to rest right now, because Trump talks a lot about the voter fraud, and there is a record of voter fraud in this country. We have some actual real cases where they have occurred. In the past 10 years, there have been 35 cases of voter fraud. That is nothing.
Can I remind you of the most recent one? A woman went and voted for Donald Trump twice, which is a felony, and now she's facing
exactly right,
because she wanted to come
in prison, right?
Yeah.
I just want to put it in context too, that 35 is out of over 800 million elections.
Right.
There have been more UFO sightings than there have been voter fraud, and so to hear him articulate that to a nation, to me, is such a disingenuous argument of stirring the pot in the wrong direction only for his own purposes.
And on top of that, encouraging his supporters to basically be these like self-appointed, monitoring patrols
and
to go down to certain neighborhoods, which is the phrase, right? And make sure it's on the up and up. And you can only sort of imagine those certain neighborhoods are going to be mostly people of color and neighborhoods of color.
Disenfranchised communities.
Disenfranchised communities. And that seems insanely scary.
That's why we're having this conversation.
Potentially illegal.
Right. That's why we're having this conversation and informing our audience so that they really know and understand, well, what is voter fraud? And is it something that is prolific throughout the nation? Should I be afraid of it? And no, you should not be afraid of it, at least not in the way that I think that candidate is talking about it for the rest of the nation. I think it's a very dangerous argument, and I'd love to have a debate with him, but he doesn't call me to get my insight on what he should be saying about. Maybe I'll tweet him, but then he'll attack me, and
actually his aide said he can't be on Twitter because he's that much of a liability to himself.
So I don't know. He shouts him out, right?
I don't know. You had something to say on that.
completely co-sign everything Paul said. But, you know, there's a reason that when Trump uses this language to say that the system's rigged, there's a reason it's so seductive. You know, the reasons that he gives are false, and he's encouraging violence and voter suppression, but the system is rigged. And there's an absolute political alienation in this country. People realize that the system is gerrymandered and because of the Electoral College, because of the way House districts are drawn, because it's hard to vote. I mean, it's not a national holiday. We're the only country in the world where felons can't vote. I mean, it seems like the system is rigged in so many ways.
But that would be in his favor.
That's, to help billionaires like Donald Trump.
And Republicans.
Sure, but, you know.
He's just like us, Dina, okay?
If you're struggling to understand the American system and you're seeing all the craziness that goes on in Washington, D.C., and you hear someone say that the system's rigged,
right.
I can understand the appeal, though.
I mean, I think Bernie was saying that before Trump. I mean, he's basically like gerrymandered Bernie's.
No, I mean that is why, you know, unwittingly the two were aligned on a lot of, you know, on a lot of ways, and they had that same appeal. I mean, we could say a lot about Donald Trump and some of the problematic things he said, but he tapped in to a very legitimate anger out there. I've gone out, I've reported, I've talked to, you know, Trump supporters who really feel like America's not working for them, who are very resentful of the Washington elite, who are struggling to make ends meet. So when he does say the system is rigged, they're like, yeah, screw Washington, you're right.
And one of those ways is there's a lot of dark money in campaigns.
What's
and
dark money,
elections.
Francesca?
I don't know, Dina. It's a great question. All I know is that there's been $180 million of it in this, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, in this election alone. $180 million. That's insane. But I want to show you guys a little bit more about dark money, so take a look at this fact. It's no big secret. Money helps candidates get elected. But there are limits, right? Like, for example, you, as an individual, can only give $2,700 to any candidate. Or you could vote. But individuals aren't what fund multi-million-dollar campaigns that win elections. It's shadier than that. I'm sure you've heard of super PACs, those giant vessels of cash for candidates. Well, there's something even worse. It's called dark money, but it's packaged in a bright way. The way it works is big donors give to social welfare nonprofits. And unlike super PACs, those nonprofits never have to reveal where the money is coming from. In 2012, they spent over $250 million in the presidential race. That's up from $85 million in 2008 and $3 million in 2004. The primary purpose of these nonprofits can't be political, but it is, because they end up spending just under half of their budget, i.e. not the majority, to support a particular candidate. Like the Conservative Solutions Project, which has funded nearly all of Marco Rubio's ads. What do they do with the rest of their money? They buy what are called issue ads, which aren't considered political spending because they don't directly tell you to vote for a certain candidate. They just tell you about an issue.
When I found out that the insurance companies were denying coverage for the therapy that Samuel needed, I couldn't believe it.
Except then they not so subtly tell you to vote for a certain candidate.
Thom Tillis understood those challenges and was a huge advocate for us.
We're regular people, and Thom Tillis saw a need, and he fought for it.
That was from the group Carolina Rising, whose $5 million campaign successfully unseated a Democratic senator in 2014. Almost all of the group's funding came from a $4.8 million contribution from one anonymous donor. Again, though they have to report their political spending, these nonprofits never have to disclose who gave them all the cash. On Carolina Rising's tax form, they also didn't bother to hide the fact that they were directly spending money on candidates. But when asked if they engaged in political campaigning, they said no. They just talk about the issues. Nonprofits also get around that whole not being political issue by giving grants to similarly minded organizations to help educate the public on their favorite issues. That's how billionaire donors, the Koch brothers, prefer to do things. In 2012, 3 nonprofits they're linked to funneled money into their mothership nonprofit, Americans for Prosperity. That group then spent $33 million fighting Democrats in federal elections. What about the 2016 elections? Groups have already spent 20 times more money than they did at the same point in the 2012 election, and the cash keeps piling up. So just how much dark money will end up fueling this presidential race? And how can we stop American democracy from being sold to the highest bidder? $180 million. that we know of now.
Of dark money.
Of dark money.
Lee, there's this perception out there that Hillary Clinton is beholden to a lot of special interests, and she's very cozy with Wall Street and stuff. I know you do a lot of reporting for The Intercept. I follow a lot of it. What has kind of struck you the most in following her campaign?
Well, we have talked a lot about Clinton's history on a range of policy issues. One thing that I think is interesting about her experience that hasn't been talked about in this campaign, we've done a little bit of reporting on this, but for a campaign that's just covered her nonstop for the last 3 years, I've seen almost no discussion of her role at the State Department. I mean, she's known for kind of being the architect of the Libya campaign. That's probably one of the biggest parts of her resume there. But her other kind of claim to fame as Secretary of State was promoting natural gas. She promoted the development of natural gas through fracking, through the development of liquefied natural gas terminals all over the world. This was a strategy, she says, to counter the role of Russia, that if Europe was less dependent on Russian natural gas, Russia would have less leverage in European politics. But the way that this has played out is that the State Department, under Clinton's leadership, developed an 80-person team to work with companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil, companies that later donated lots of money to the Clinton Foundation and have been a big part of her presidential campaign in developing American-style fracking all over the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. And this is a big part of how she's governed and how she's taken an aspect of her policy background and transformed it into lots of campaign money. So that's one thing that we've covered a lot, and I haven't seen as much in the mainstream media. And I think it's an important dynamic with Clinton. I wouldn't say it's tough to use terms like pay to play or whatever, but from the WikiLeaks emails, we see donors regularly giving her money, giving her foundation money, promising to bundle large donations for her campaign, and it's not a shock here, then demanding something in return. And that's just the way any campaign is run, but she's also developed the largest big money fundraising network in all of American history. So this is certainly a dynamic to watch for in the Clinton presidency.
Definitely. I think we're going to turn to Hadley now, who might have some more results.
Hadley, what have you got?
A few things coming with the race for the Senate. Marco Rubio, you guys remember him? He has won and held on to his seat in Florida. Yep, and we also had Illinois. We've had a flip, and the Democrat has won that race. Tammy Duckworth. And if you remember, she's a vet, right? She's a veteran, and her opponent made some racist insults publicly, Mark Kirk. But yeah, so it was thought that she would probably win. It's not too big of a surprise, but that is a flip for the Democrats. But overall, Republicans are holding on to their seats. People are projecting that Republicans are more likely than not to maintain control of the Senate, but we'll keep our eye on it.
Cool. Awesome. All right.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Let's ask them a fun question before.
Okay. Go.
I don't know, something like, what are you going to do after this? Or, I mean, that's not really fun, but like, what are you going to do when you find out who, well, you have your own.
Disneyland, right?
Paul, you're running in your own.
I'm really excited that the second we stop taping, I'm going to go and hold a sign again out with my material to meet more of the voters before the polls close. And it's going to be a fun evening for me because I haven't slept in about 3 days.
Oh, my goodness. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Are you going to be relieved when this election's over, or the work just starts for you?
It would be nice to move on to different things, but we're going to aggressively cover the transition. We know from the WikiLeaks emails, this is where the real kind of power decisions are made. In these months where people actually tune out from the election and there's that lame duck period, this is where the special interests come in. The incoming president will appoint 4,000 people. People focus on the cabinet secretaries, but a lot of these regulators and public officials are the ultimate ones who are enforcing the law, creating the law. So, yeah, that'll be fun.
That's a great place to end. Like, I think if we're anticipating like where both of these candidates are going to be and what they're going to do in terms of predicting what their first 100, 200 days are going to look like, and we know that Clinton has talked about she's going to focus on jobs and immigration, specifically in jobs in the clean sector area and small business, and then Obama saying that he's going to focus on immigration as well, and I think they're moving in opposite directions. But the one thing that they're both consistent on is working on like NAFTA and the trade agreements, fixing that kind of stuff. I think that stuff is really interesting, and it's exactly what you were just saying, is that we will see those changes immediately. I just hope that on both of their agendas, they include issues like justice reforms that I think is going to be really important over the next administration, no matter who is in the office, that they keep that on the agenda and at the forefront to address the rift that we see growing with disenfranchised communities in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. Yeah, thanks for stopping by, Lee and Paul. If you guys are tuning in, thank you for watching AJ Plus's live election coverage. We're going to be with you all night until one of these candidates gets 270 electors. In the meantime, check out these results.